Santa Fe, New Mexico, and talking about his latest book. And your latest book is primarily about the Maya prophecies.
Yes.
So can you talk to us a little bit about where these prophecies came from and how they've been preserved?
Yes. We find them written in a series of manuscripts. And the collective name for these manuscripts is the Chilam Balam books. This is how they were created. When the Spanish took over Yucatan, of course it was one of their immediate goals and agendas to eradicate the ancient ways. So they would train certain members of aristocratic families to read and write in our Western alphabet, and they would say, well, since you can read or write, now you can be the village school teacher, now you can be the village choir master. But the Spanish never had a clue as to what these guys were actually doing when they got home from work at night. They had preserved manuscripts, sometimes passed on from fathers and grandfathers. And after they had finished smiling at the Spaniards and pretending to be good, believing Christians and loyal subjects of the Spanish Empire, they would go right home and they would start recording. By this time, hieroglyphs had been forgotten because we're now into the 1600s, and etc. They would start recording, writing in the Mayan language, but in our alphabet, everything that had been passed down to them. The rituals, the stories, the legends, and, most importantly for our purposes, the prophecies. Now, if we take a look at these prophecies, they seem pretty meaningless to us. For example, the prophecy for the period 8 Ahau says, the shields descend, the arrows descend. Oh, good. What the heck does that mean? And similarly, with 4 Ahau, the quetzal bird is coming. The blue-green bird is coming. What's that supposed to mean? The reason that the prophecies are written this way is because, more likely than not, they were founded upon the words that shamans spoke while they were in a state of mystical trance. This probably goes all the way back to the classic period of Tikal and Palenque, but was never actually written down until, under the threat of an endangered culture, the Maya of Yucatan said, my gosh, my son already speaks, more Spanish than he does Maya, and, he wants to be a lawyer, so I guess I better write this stuff down before everybody else forgets it. So that's how these strange poetic utterances, which constitute the Mayan prophecies, came to be created.
And if you start looking at the human factor of it, when you talk about them by day, they're being the good little villagers under the Spanish rule. Mm-hmm. But now if we really paint the picture, when they're going home, they're having to write all this down, and it's not like today where we'd power up our Mac and just start writing out. They're doing this at home at night via candlelight, probably under the fear of being discovered.
Yeah.
And again, they don't have a Mac to write it down, or their big pen. It's very arduous task to get it all down, and imagine the enormity of making sure that what was passed down to them, they're taking their own ego out of it and trying to pass it down as cleanly as possible.
Yeah, although sometimes they did make comments, like, for example, somebody might have been writing about 8 Ahau, the shields descend, the arrows descend, and then they'd make a note. Well, this time, such and such a city was attacked, and the arrows and the shields descended upon such and such a city, and then 260 years, 360 day years, 260 years later, when Ada Howe comes around again, they write down the shields descend, the arrows descend. This year, such and such a kingdom fell, and such a kingdom was attacked. In other words, they kept notes, individual notes, to inform their children, grandchildren, etc., just how the prophecy had worked out in that particular time that it recurred.
Well, and in keeping with that flavor, when we talk about the books of the Chilam Balam, your book was the first to really outline how there were really different books.
Yeah.
And how when folks were writing down what they saw as the prophecies, that there seems to be an undercurrent with all of them, but they each differ. It's just like if you and myself left today and wrote of today's experience, the underlying current would be the same, but we both put our own little, this is what I got.
Right. And a lot of this has to do with, if a person in northern Yucatan says, "Grandson, come here, I want to recite the prophecies." And he recites them to a particularly brilliant grandson who remembers every single word just as he said it. And then down in southern Yucatan, where guy number one has never been, some other shaman is saying, "Grandson, it's time for you to hear the prophecies." And maybe this grandson remembers the gist of it, but he remembers some words slightly differently. So we end up with differing versions. When people speak about the books of Chilam Balam, they're usually speaking about just one of them, the Chilam Balam of Chumayel, because it's just loaded with stories, legends, rituals, myths, etc. But in terms of prophecies, the prophetic portions, the one that's called Book of Chilam Balam of Tizimin is probably the most accurate. The reason it's the most accurate is because the Spanish kept trying to push eastward into the peninsula. So everybody in the west is pretty much, bowed down and beaten under. Those in the east were still rebels. Book of Tizimin comes from the east. Better versions. They had better memories. All the prophecies tend to be about twice as long.
Do you think that there's still more books, Chilam Balam books out there that we haven't found yet? Or haven't been shared?
I did not put this in my book, and I'm still not going to go into a great amount of detail. That there are roughly 11 Chilam Balam books held in different libraries around the world. But there is one that is still in the hands of the Mayan. And as far as anybody knows, this is the only one that is still in the hands of the Maya. However, these are very secretive people, so secretive that they will pass the book from one knowledge keeper to another every few years, just so that everybody is confused about which village it's actually in.
Good.
And then sometimes they will declare a festival, and the shaman will read, and the people, as if it were a series of questions, and the people will answer in chorus, just so that everybody remembers. But I'm not going to tell you where these people are.
Good.
And the reason being that they've always been secretive. They've always been very private. Up until the 1930s, if one wanted to visit their villages, one would be met with a shotgun so elderly that it left a lot of visitors wondering, is this going to shoot me or blow up in the guy's face? But in any event, the region where they live is slated for major tourist development over the next 10 to 20 years. They have enough problems ahead of them facing this new modern, postmodern cybernetic world. It's going to be a real meeting of cultures that they have enough adaptation to go through. I'm not going to make it worse by telling the whole world that they've got the last Chilam Balam book, because if I were to the minute I open my mouth and tell you where it is, there's going to be that many more tourists, jumping off the bus there.
Well, I think it's exciting to know that they have the book, and I don't think it's any of our business, yourself excluded, to know where it is. I think it's exciting to know. And
if they want you to know, they'll tell you.
Right.
Yeah.
And let me ask you this, because I hear this going back and forth. There's some speculation that the codexes, there's the Dresden Codex, there's the Codex in, is it Paris, France?
There's 3 of them that are authentically Mayan: the Dresden, the Madrid, and the Paris. And then there's one called the Grolier Codex, and they're still arguing about whether that one's for real or not. So those are the ones, yeah.
Now there's speculation that there's another codex that was taken, that was actually taken by the Vatican. And Don Alejandro, one of the Mayan elders, has on video, has on tape, talked about this codex, saying that he does believe that the Vatican has it, and he's actually put out a plea to the Vatican to bring it back. I still hear kind of, that really does exist, it really doesn't. When you were down there, did you hear anything about that, or do you have any insight on that you can share without getting in trouble?
Yes, I do. Actually, they have found many codices. However, when they find them, thanks to the extreme tropical climate down there, where I couldn't walk from here to the camera without having heat stroke, due to the humidity, every time they find one, and they find them buried with kings, in royal sarcophagi and situations like that, they're just a pile of mush. And we can say, oh, this was a book. It's completely beyond being reclaimed. Now, they're beginning to find out that certain regions of the Mayan country, notably Belize and Yucatan, are just honeycombed with caves. And you may have heard about this. They have like ritual spaces and shrines set up in caves.
Right.
Well, caves are sometimes damp and sometimes dry. The common belief is that there may very well be other codices preserved in dry caves which have not decayed over time and which may eventually be found. Who, up until 2 months ago, who would have dreamed that we would actually bust into some room and discover that this is the workshop of a Mayan calendar keeper who just happened to write all the cycles of history on his wall? Who would ever have dreamed that we could find something that amazing?
That is very...
and it just points out that there's still a lot that we are going to learn. There are some regions that have scarcely been investigated because the jungle is too thick and it's deep, and I spent some time with some guys who had worked out at El Mirador, which is the biggest, the oldest, and the hardest to get to, and they said that every night was a battle with ticks and mosquitoes and noxious bugs, and you had to watch every place that you walked because they have poisonous snakes that can kill you in half a minute. And
that's why I learned about my Maya from Santa Fe.
Yeah, that's and I haven't tried El Mirador either. I'll admit that much. But as we begin, to have better ways of accessing these remote areas, and as we discover more and more about these remote areas, we're finding things that are so amazing we never expected to find them. That library at Shultun that we just talked about is a very good example. If they've found that, it's possible they will find codices.
Exciting. Until next time, stay tuned for more on the Maya with Kenneth Johnson.